Hello, and welcome back to Owens Bay. In today's episode, I'm going to be detailing Sasquatch National Park, which is located in the valley between the two mountains we're flying towards right now. This is essentially the initial detailing for the park. It's not complete, but I'm putting in all the basic infrastructure and the main features during this episode. At a later date, I'm going to probably come back and finish the detailing here. I think in the near future, I'll have tools that'll make this much more interesting and easier to do. Right now, we're flying over the town of Farwell. Anyway, my name is Gyves, and let's get started. The main feature of the national park, it's not really part of the national park, but it cuts through the national park, is a major road infrastructure project, a major highway system that cuts through the edge of the park. As I'm building this out, it's going to seem really pretty aggressive what I'm going to do to the landscape here. When I'm done, it'll all look like it belongs, but as I'm building it out, it's going to be, I'm not going to be respecting the terrain very much at all. I need the highway to fit into the landscape in a certain way, and I just need to do these sorts of manipulations in order to get it to work. I'm basing this highway project on the Coquihalla highway system in British Columbia, Canada. Now, at the time this was built in the mid-80s, it was the largest road infrastructure project in North America. And if you go back and on YouTube, you can go find video documentaries of the building project. It was extremely aggressive and was completed in a 20-month time frame, which is really quite impressive. So I'm kind of using that as my justification of like the extreme terraforming that some parts of the highway required in order to get it to work. What I'm aiming for here is for it to have a very unique look in the landscape, and we'll see examples of that later on in the build. But right now what I'm doing is laying out the initial highway and then making adjustments to kind of smooth out all the bumps and kinks, so it looks like a modern highway project, which, you know, the engineering involved here would be pretty substantial. And yeah, there's, you know, it alters the terrain quite a bit. Now, I tried to keep the grade to about 10% through as much of the highway as possible. There might be a few sections where it might be a bit steeper than that, but I wanted it to be fairly reasonable and not completely outrageous. I think it works pretty well here. It obviously looks like a fairly steep ascent into the mountain pass, but it doesn't seem totally unreasonable either. Now what I'm building right here is directly inspired by a snow shed from the Coquihalla Highway. It's essentially what a snow shed is it's basically a covered man-made tunnel in an area that's prone to slides during the winter time. Now, I didn't really have a location in the mountains that seemed completely suitable, so I had to make a bit of this area here where it would appear that a slide area would be more likely to occur. So it took a bit of terrain manipulation to get that to work. I'm going to be using these horizontal prop pillars as the main building component for the snow shed. This is my first time doing one of these sorts of constructions, so it's okay. It obviously has a few flaws to it, but like I said, my first time doing this sort of type of build. It's not perfect, but I think the final results are pretty good. I've put down a little prop bus here just to gauge height and stuff, because sometimes visualizing scale in game can be challenging without a reference point. I used the line tool to draw these out, and to get the spacing, the pillars to be as close together as possible, I had to kind of manipulate the units by Anyway, it was a bit of manipulation to get it to work. I wasn't able to get them perfectly touching, but I think looking back at it, I think it looks pretty good. It's just a little bit of visual interest to the surface, so it's not just a flat, smooth surface. And for the vertical pillars, I'm using the pedestrian pillars. They have this nice rounded edge. They also have these nice markings in the surface that I can use to line things up, which came in very handy here. I'm going to be using some surfaces and decals to try to tie this into the landscape. This is a pretty disturbed area of the landscape. It's a slide area is usually like if they feel the need to build a snow shed, it would be an area prone to repeated slides. So that would essentially clear away all the trees, all the dirt, everything would just kind of like leaving a fairly smooth surface for snow to constantly be sliding down the slope. So that's what I'm trying to replicate here. Now I'm doing it with these surfaces. This is, as I was working through it, this became quite obvious, not a very good way of doing it. I did the best attempt I could here. Like I said at the intro, I think in the not too distant future, there's going to be far better tools to do this with, and I'm probably going to come back and revisit this detailing at some future point and hopefully be able to do it in a better way. But for the time being, I think this works fairly well. It has some issues with it, like the edges here, these hard edges. There's nothing I can do about it. The decals don't work on these slope surfaces very well, so I can't use decals to blend the edges, or at least it's really kind of, like I said, it doesn't really work very well. So I have to use trees and bushes here to try to do it. It's okay, but like I said, there's going to be better ways to do this fairly soon, I think. When trying to lay down multiple overlapping surfaces like this, they become very difficult to work with. It's hard to, if you need to adjust one, it becomes very hard to select just one of them, and usually you end up selecting the wrong one, and half the time you end up deleting out things you didn't mean to, and it's a rather tedious process. What I'm doing here is I'm using the boulders to kind of break up the hard edge of the different surfaces, just so they don't look so continuous. It works, but it's imperfect. I thought it would be interesting to include some dead trees at the very bottom of the slide area that were like obviously brought down during some winter slide at some past date. This looks pretty cool. Unfortunately, at any sort of distance, it kind of just disappears on the landscape, which is unfortunate, but I like the idea of it. Now, at this point, I decided that I was rather unhappy with the pine trees on the map. They are not a good representation of what pine trees would look like in this particular region. The spruce trees are much better representation of the types of trees that you would see in this area of the world. So I go to a bit of effort here to take them all out and just replace them with spruce. I'm not sure how I feel about it. The ground color with the spruce doesn't quite work. There's a lot here I cut out where I was trying out different surface textures on the mountainsides to try to make something look more like a more realistic mountain. It didn't really work very well. I ended up cutting it all out because I didn't use any of it. Now, just like the snow shed, there's other features on this highway and other mountain passes that are quite common, and I thought it would be important to try to include them. Right here, what I'm trying to create is, I think what it's referred to as a runaway lane. So this is on the descending slope into Farwell. And what this lane is for the large semi-trucks, in case their brakes fail or something like that, they have a safe place that they can run off the highway. Now, it's really imperfect. I had to really do a lot of terrain manipulation to get this to kind of fit in. And there wasn't really a good location for it in the landscape. So trying to create one, it works, but it's not perfect. I'm just going to be completing the old highway system. It's just essentially we're at the very edge of the map here. It just snakes along this little lake, and it just connects back up to the main highway. That's probably not what would have happened here. It probably would have just run off the map at some point right about here. But if I did that, it would have created another outside connection, causing more traffic to run through this area, more traffic than I actually wanted to run through this road. So I just connected it to the main highway at the very edge of the map. It's a pretty crude connection, but it's in a location in which I'm never going to look at, so it doesn't really matter. Along this old highway, this is inside the national park, so there would be a lot of these kind of rest stop areas, and that's what I'm building here. Just a little area along the side of the road, along the lake, where people can pull off to take a break from driving, have a picnic, enjoy the mountain sights, which are quite nice from the lake. Sorry that we're off screen here. I'm just going to use some of the Harbor Master J's stair assets here to create an access point to the beach. And I'm just going to use some decals to create the pull-off. And this is the overall effect I'm looking for at a distance. That's exactly how I want the highway to look there. At the far well end of the highway, before you start your ascent into the mountain pass, another feature that's very common on these mountain pass areas is an area adjacent to the side of the road. It's essentially a large pull-off area for the semi-trucks to chain up their tires for winter driving conditions through the mountain pass. So that's what I'm building here. I'm turning it into a bit of a rest stop. There's the gas station. I'm using the one-stop signature building asset here as the main feature. So gas stations, rest stops, small restaurants, diners, that sort of thing. I put in all these parking lines, but at some point I was wondering if that was actually appropriate. I went and took a look at one of these pull-off areas, and yeah, there are no parking lines at all, which makes sense. If this was in the middle of winter, you wouldn't be able to see the parking anyway. So what I'm putting in here are a couple of what I'm going to assume are service buildings for the highway and the national park. So these are the maintenance yards for all the machinery for the park, the snow plows, the road maintenance crews, that sort of thing. I didn't put an office building to represent an administration office. We are right next to the city of Farwell, so the administration offices could very well be just in town. And because our region's mostly set in the middle of summer, this area wouldn't actually be in much use at this time. So I just put in a couple of semi-trucks just to look like something was going on. But if this was in the winter and it was a heavy snow conditions, that place would be full of trucks right now. This area is fairly, visually, it's pretty uninteresting, so I'm going to use a bunch of decals here just to make it look like this paved area has seen a lot of, severe weather conditions over the years. The location I'm working on right now is just right on the edge of the park. It's not in the Sasquatch National Park proper. For the Pacific Northwest, there's something that's fairly common, and I thought it'd be fun to try to include it on the map, and I'm going to build them right here. I am going to be putting in some hot spring to sell the effect that something is going on here other than just a couple of small lakes. I'm going to be using the smokestacks from some industrial buildings. Now, I've seen this technique used to create waterfall effects which look really quite good. For here, we're just going to use them to simulate steam coming off the water. And it's important to pick out a smokestack that actually is producing a white steam effect and not one that's producing a dirty pollution effect. I think I end up sinking these about quite far into the ground, maybe 30-40 meters into the ground. All I really want is a little tip top of the steam to be coming out. I don't want like a huge plume. Right here, I am building a small little community. There's going to be a motel here, a gas station, maybe a small restaurant, and a small collection of houses and stuff. It's like you see these all over the place. There's these tiny little communities on the side of the road. As you're driving by, you're wondering why they exist where they exist. For the moment, I've decided that the hot springs are essentially a local attraction. It's only the locals really know that they're up there. They're not advertised. They're not. It's not like a resort or anything like that. I have a feeling in the future I might come back and revisit this area. I'm debating whether or not to actually turn it into a proper resort. But I think that might make for a fun future project if I decide to go that way. Right here, I'm putting down a little motel to represent the... This is essentially, what everything around here built up around. So a motel, and then I've attached this little commercial building here to represent kind of a restaurant or a little pub of some sort. When I was building this area for parking here for the hot springs, I really should have put down a prop car for a reference for scale. I ended up making this way too large, and it wasn't to the point where I actually put down a few cars that I realized, oh, this is absurdly big, and I ended up having to cut down the size of it considerably. Yeah, it was at this point where I realized that I really goofed on the size. I mean, that's comically large parking space for a hidden attraction of sorts. And of course, no national park is not complete without a campsite. The detailing here is pretty straightforward. We don't have a huge selection of different assets that we can use for this sort of stuff. So, it's the camp trailer, the tent, the fire pits, those sorts of things. Those are the assets that are being used to create these campsites. Now, I did want to include a couple of functioning buildings up here to try to at least have some traffic or some activity. I'm using a small commercial building here for the camp office, washrooms, laundry, whatever like that. I'm using some of these very small residential homes. I'm going to strip off all the assets, and they look kind of like cabins that people could rent out. Now, I don't know how successful this is going to be. I mean, they are nowhere near any types of services up here, so the people who actually live up here, they might be very unhappy, but I wanted to try to include something so it would encourage some sort of activity. And I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Not a particularly complicated build, but I wanted to get this area filled in so it actually fit into the overall region and had a bit of function to it. Obviously, I'm going to be coming back to it and probably adding a bit more development at some future point, but this is just to kind of establish the parameters of how the area is going to look overall. And I do need a few names here, like this hot springs. I don't really know what to call it. So if you have any name ideas, please let me know. Anyway, if you stuck around to the end of the episode, thank you so much for watching. If you found anything of this video that was helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.